There are two answers to the question of why Michael Corleone underwent such a profound transformation and appeared as a different man in The Godfather Part III compared to the first two iconic films of the saga. On one level, there is the in-universe explanation for Michael's change rooted in the narrative events and circumstances his character faced over the decades portrayed. But there's also an external, out-of-universe reality related to actor Al Pacino's personal life and approach to performing that factored into his depiction of Michael in the final installment. Within the rich tapestry of The Godfather's fictional world, Michael Corleone's metamorphosis by Part 3 was the hard-fought culmination of over 20 years of anguish, guilt, and inner turmoil stemming from his ruthless rise to power atop the family's criminal empire. The unprecedented psychic burden he carried for ordering the murder of his own traitorous brother, Fredo, left Michael permanently scarred in a way that dramatically reshaped his mentality, persona, and priorities over time. Whether one believes Michael was tragically justified in having Fredo killed due to uncompromising Sicilian codes about family superiority, or whether the act was an unforgivable violation, the psychological toll of this fratricide plagued Michael's waking life. It gnawed away at his former cold-blooded, hyper-calculating nature, stripping away the unfeeling mask and bravado he had carefully cultivated as the new feared patriarch of the dreaded Corleone clan. Despite Michael's lengthy experience and operational know-how in the underworld, allowing him to retain a powerful aura of invincibility and strategic cunning, the unshakable guilt over Fredo's murder fundamentally changed him. It made him a man progressively less driven solely by cruelty, self-preservation at any cost, and a lust for power and dominance. This wearying process paved the way for Part 3's Michael to be portrayed as more introspective, rendered emotionally vulnerable by his past sins, and even capable of tenderness at times. It's critical to remember that from the outset, as depicted in the original Godfather film, Michael's ultimate endgame had always been to take the family business fully legitimate, fulfilling the grand American dream, the vision laid out for him by his father Vito Corleone. The Don wanted Michael to rise above the violent criminal underworld, becoming a pezzo novante, a powerful, respected civic figure and big shot, like a lawyer, senator, or maybe even president. Yet Michael was forced into the treacherous mafia world against his wishes in order to protect his father after the failed assassination attempt that sparked the first film's bloody saga. His increasing embrace of depravity, murders, and savage modes of warfare against rival families became a brutal means of insulating and solidifying the Corleone's primacy through fear. By systematically eliminating threats from the other four families' bosses, along with violently removing other looming liabilities like the corrupt NYPD authorities and even his rival and foe, the villainous Hyman Roth, Michael secured his iron-fisted control atop the empire. But this path to kingpin status also necessitated him brutally and ruthlessly turning on even his closest loved ones and family members themselves, his former wife Kay and his own brother Fredo. Michael's repeated choices to betray blood ties destroyed his hopes for an ordinary, upstanding life outside of the criminal underworld that he had once dreamed of escaping. The self-inflicted demolition of his own family marked Michael's peak as a feared, uncompromising power player whose cruel cunning was unmatched. Yet it also contained the insidious seeds of his eventual undoing, personal downfall, and ultimate push towards reformation. By the time the events of Part 3 unfold, Michael Corleone had already systematically carried out or overseen the cold-blooded murders and eliminations of virtually all his adversaries and threats. With longtime enemies like the elite dons of the four families vanquished, Michael's sudden shift towards a more reasoned, world-weary persona was pragmatic in solidifying his hard-earned reputation for vicious cunning. There was no longer any strategic need for the same level of outrageous violent theatrics and flexed muscle that defined Michael's devastating rise to power years earlier. Instead, the aging Michael focused his efforts on investing in high-profile, legitimate enterprises and business acquisitions like the lucrative Immobiliari. This could finally extricate his vast wealth and holdings from the underworld criminal doings that had defined the Corleone empire for decades. This transition towards respectability was carefully facilitated through Michael's creating strategic buffers to distance himself from any ongoing illicit activities while providing plausible deniability about still pulling some strings in the background. But beyond the financial power plays and corporate machinations to go mainstream, the Michael Corleone seen in Part 3 was also gripped by a palpable, introspective longing, a deep yearning to reconnect with his long-fractured family before his limited time ran out, due to his advancing age and declining health issues like diabetes. The once vindictive, brutal Michael is reintroduced as a very different, lesser man. He's newly driven by remorse over the unimaginable collateral damage his merciless pursuit of power and respect had wrought on his own loved ones, a cost he apparently deemed too severe upon retrospect. This soulful vulnerability and desire for familial closeness once more manifest in several ways over the courses of Part 3. We see it in Michael's attempts to amends and relentlessly pursue a relationship with his former wife Kay, the children he previously had kept at arm's length, like his beloved operatic prodigy son Anthony, and even his hot-tempered sister Connie, with whom he shares an almost tender bond at times. His character's uncharacteristic tenderness and gentleness appears fueled by a sort of spiritual epiphany that the demolition of his family was an unnecessary, tragic price he paid for the Corleone family's perceived security. The radical reframing of perspective and values culminates with Michael's anguished, long-awaited confession to a cardinal, where he shockingly acknowledges the grave transgressions and atrocities he once justified as calculating moves for too long. Pleading for absolution, Michael appears to experience a cathartic release and an unburdening of his heavy conscience. The act of reconciling with God and the church seems to further open him up to not only seeking forgiveness from his wife, children, and family he alienated for decades, but to truly value repairing those damaged bonds in the twilight of his life. Of course, there were also significant out-of-universe factors that contributed to Michael Corleone's strikingly different, muted persona and depiction in The Godfather Part III compared to the first two films. Chief among them was a noticeable shift in actor Al Pacino's internationalization and less explosive, more introspective approach to performing the iconic character he had first solidified in the 1970s. By Pacino's own admission, throughout the 1980s, he had been dealing with personal issues like alcohol abuse, along with insecurity and pressures that came with being an instantly recognizable global film icon after the incredible success of The Godfather and his powerhouse roles in Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon. This volatile combination of factors, mixed with some professional setbacks and romantic failures, seemed to wear on Pacino over the decade in a way that impacted his work. Objectively speaking, Pacino's very external, more theatrical performing style from his younger days appeared to give way to a minimalist, internalized method approached by the time The Godfather Part III shot in 1990. Whether consciously or not, Pacino's acting choices in Part 3 directly informed the more soft-spoken, contemplative depiction of Michael Corleone's bone-deep world weariness and emotional heaviness in the final chapters of the story. Many have pointed to Pacino looking drained and even disinterested during certain scenes of Part 3, a stark contrast to the ferocious intensity, commitment, and laser focus he brought to literally inhabiting Michael Corleone's headspace in the first two Godfather films. While Pacino has dismissed such criticism about his performance in Part 3, insisting he simply adopted an intentionally internalized subtle approach fitting an older Corleone, it's inarguable that his choices resulted in a very different, reined-in portrayal overall compared to his truly iconic work in the past Godfather movies. Whether through conscious acting choices, Pacino's own personal evolutions, or perhaps a combination of the two, Michael Corleone ended up being represented as a distinctly diminished, regretful soul by the final film, providing an in-universe and out-of-universe culmination to one of cinema's most complex, philosophical, and captivating character arcs of all time.